about logical reasoning, which is going to be on the revision of content quiz number 2. So here are some basic terms that you need to know. Induction, forming a generalization from a set of specific examples or pieces of evidence. That is, going from small to big. Deduction is the opposite, forming a probable conclusion based on a given premise or principle. That is, going from big to small. Notice how the word probable is italicized because oftentimes in deduction the conclusion is not guaranteed. So it's a probable conclusion based on a given premise. Let's put it in a more visual way. Okay? General principles, big ideas, in deduction lead to specific conclusions or specific examples. Induction is the opposite. You take several different specific examples and move to a general principle or general conclusion. Let's put it yet another way. Inductive reasoning starts with the evidence and leads to a conclusion. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, actually starts with the conclusion or premise and then moves to smaller pieces of evidence in order to prove that larger conclusion. Let's focus on inductive reasoning first, because I think that's easier to grasp because we have a lot of more real-world examples of it. What detectives do is induction, making observations, gathering different pieces of evidence, moving from specific cases to a generalization or conclusion. Here are some real-world examples. We came home and the window was broken, the TV was missing, and the front door was open. We've been robbed. Okay? Not too big of an induction, fairly obvious, but this is just an example to show you the pattern, right? Small pieces of evidence, broken window, missing TV, open front door, leads to a bigger conclusion. We've been robbed. Here's another example. Every time I pat my cat's stomach, it tries to scratch me. I shouldn't pat my cat's stomach. So several different observations done at different times lead this person to conclude that they shouldn't do something. Okay? So small observations lead to a big conclusion. Here might be some examples of inductive reasoning applied to an American dream argument. Unemployment is high. Incarceration rates are rising. Immigration policy needs to be reformed. The American dream is dead. Okay? Many pieces of evidence lead to a general conclusion. Unemployment, incarceration, immigration policy, all of them, in this person's opinion, the American dream is dead. Here's another example from the opposite side of the spectrum. My mom, my friend, and my neighbor have all successfully immigrated to the U.S., gotten jobs, and made a better life for their families. The American dream is still an inspiration. Small observations or different examples of different people who have been successful immigrating to the U.S. leads this person to a general conclusion that the American dream is still an inspiration. There are potential problems with induction, such as using all in your conclusion. For example, several people I know have successful immigration stories, therefore all immigrants are able to achieve their American dreams. That's actually probably not true. Okay, there are many examples of immigrants who come to the U.S. and actually are not that successful and may leave, or they may struggle through a life of poverty and social. Well, they're on the boundaries of society. Okay, so using all is very problematic. Observations or evidence is incorrect. Okay, most young black men are in prison. This means the American dream is fading away for minorities. In fact, most young black men are actually not in prison. It's still a minority of black men. It's still a disturbingly high amount of black men, but it's not most young black men. Okay, so that's incorrect. It debunks your argument and actually makes you look less credible. Assumed connections are incorrect. Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., and James Baldwin all argued against the American dream. The American dream is an illusion. In fact, you'd be very hard-pressed to actually find evidence from any three of those speakers to suggest that they actually argue against the American dream. Yes, maybe at times they were critical of a general definition of the American dream, or what America is, but they don't argue against the American dream. So that's a false assumption, and those connections are incorrect. and then the conclusions are not supported by the evidence. This is actually very common, and it's actually a logical fallacy called a non sequitur. Here's an example. The most successful people in America today go to Ivy League schools. Therefore, you have to go to an Ivy League school to be successful in America. Okay, that's just absolutely not true. Okay, there are, of course, a lot of people who go to Ivy League schools who are successful, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to a really top-notch and also really expensive Ivy League school in order to be successful. You can find other ways to success. Okay, so this is a review again of inductive reasoning. Think of detectives, right? Making observations, finding small pieces of evidence, making general conclusions. Okay, let's move on to deductive reasoning. I don't have a handy graphic GIF for this one, okay? But deductive reasoning does use a formula of sorts. Major premise plus minor premise equals conclusion. This is what's known as a syllogism, this formula right here. Major premise plus minor premise equals conclusion. Here's an example. All seniors take AP classes at this school. That's the major premise. I am a senior this year. That's the minor premise. So this is going to lead to a conclusion. You can probably guess what it's going to be because this is a rather simple syllogism. But, therefore, I will take AP classes this year. Okay, major premise, all seniors. Minor premise, I'm a senior. Conclusion, therefore, I will take AP classes this year. Okay, this is an example that could be used in an American dream argument of a deduction. The American dream is the promise of richer, better life for everyone. Immigrants who come here achieve that better life by finding jobs and allowing their children to grow up in America. Therefore, the American dream should still be considered an inspiration for all those who hope to come to this country. So the major premise is this definition of the American dream as a richer and better life. The minor premise is that immigrants do come here and actually achieve that better life. The conclusion is, therefore, the American dream should still be considered an inspiration for those people who want to immigrate to the U.S. Okay? So, potential problems. Okay? Some aspect of your syllogism is incorrect. Okay, so let's go back to this example that was just given about the American dream. Let's look at the first part. Okay? You could argue with that. Some people would argue with that definition of the American dream. So some people actually may not accept that premise as being correct. Therefore, they would debunk your entire argument. But let's say they do accept that. Let's look at the second part. Okay? Some people would actually argue that some immigrants who come here actually do not achieve that better life. So therefore, even if this first part is true, this second part may actually not follow. And then you get to the third part, the conclusion. So even if you accept the first two parts, you could still say that this is not true because of this word all. All those who hope to come to this country may actually not be best served by trying to follow their American dream. So you can quibble with just about any part of the syllogism. Major premise, minor premise, or conclusion. These are some trouble words when you're actually doing a deductive argument. Try to avoid using words like all, always, never, or none. That automatically puts you in a corner. It makes it very hard to argue out of, okay? Because it really limits your argument and makes it very easy to disprove. So we'll go back to this, right? Deductive reasoning. Big ideas or big principles leading to specific conclusions or specific examples. Inductive reasoning is the opposite. Specific observations and examples joined together to make a general principle or conclusion. I hope you've enjoyed this. Watch it and get ready for the content quiz revision on Thursday.